us from FYA. We're placement students. I'm Nick.
I'm Molly.
I'm Abby.
I'm Emily.
I'm Shams.
So today we're going to be reacting to a video about assisted dying. So I hope you guys enjoy it, and let's go.
Should assisted dying become legal in the UK? That's what British lawmakers are debating ahead of a vote today. As the debate got underway, demonstrators opposing the idea of assisted dying started gathering outside the Parliament in London. Observers are expecting protests in support of the bill too. The contentious topic has split UK society for years, but recent polls suggest a majority of Britons now favour changing the law. The bill would allow adults who are terminally ill to get assistance in ending their own life. Advocates of assisted dying have long fought for such a law. DW's Birgit Maas met with some of them.
A painless death for those who want it. That's what these campaigners in Bath in the south of England are fighting for. They are supporting a proposed law that enables terminally ill people to be assisted to end their own lives. It's a cause close to Sophie Pandit's heart.
When my mother wanted an assisted death, even though we knew it was against the law, our morality was to support her and enable her to have a death free of suffering.
Sophie's mother, Anne, had been diagnosed with a rare brain disorder that would eventually have made her completely dependent on others. She tried to take her own life, then decided to travel to Switzerland, where assisted dying is legal. Her 3 children went with her, knowing this would be their final days and hours as a family. Sophie says their mother died before her time because she needed to be fit enough to make the journey.
We had to do it in a foreign country. If assisted dying had been legal in this country, she would have known that she could die at home in this country, she could die with her friends and family around her should she wish, and it also would have meant that she most likely would have died later on in her illness.
But some people are against changing the law. Disability rights campaigner Phil Friend is afraid that disabled people could be coerced into an assisted death.
Society sees disabled people as people who are dependent, as people who are vulnerable. And basically what that means is that they take a view that my life isn't as worth living as theirs is. So if I get really ill, it would be a kindness, wouldn't it, to let me go.
The new law proposes safeguards against such coercion. 2 doctors and a judge would need to approve the death. But this does not convince Phil. He has lived with disability and the discrimination that he says has come with it since he contracted polio at the age of 3. He feels he needed to constantly fight for his rights and does not completely trust the medical establishment.
So how are 2 doctors who don't know me supposed to assess whether I'm being coerced or not? Whether people are leaning on me to take the medication? They won't, and doctors aren't trained to look at coercion. That's a very skilled job.
Phil says the proposed law pits his autonomy and desire to live against someone else's autonomy and wish to have a pain-free death. He would rather have resources diverted into better palliative care. Sophie Pandit is convinced that it is cruel to deny people a death without suffering. A moral dilemma that UK lawmakers will have to examine very carefully.
For more on this dilemma, let's cross over to London, where DW's Birgit Maas is standing by. Birgit, she's following today's debate from outside the House of Commons. Birgit, assisted dying is a hugely controversial topic. How is it being debated in the UK Parliament?
Where I am, emotions are really running high. So behind me, you can see a lot of disability rights campaigners. They are demonstrating for MPs not to change the law, take more time, divert more resources into palliative care. However, if you just walk along a little bit further behind Parliament, opposite Big Ben, there are a lot of campaigners who want the MPs to change the law. A lot of them are motivated by having loved ones they saw them dying, often a very painful death, and they are arguing that it should be up to the individual to decide if they are terminally ill, how they want to die. And MPs are debating this also with a lot of emotion. A lot of MPs inside the House where the debate is actually now taking place, they haven't made up their mind yet because they understand both sides of the argument. So it's a very intense, emotional subject, and I think it's being debated here in the UK quite subtly.
In a report, Birgit, we heard from a disability campaigner who explained why people with disabilities might feel threatened by this bill. What kind of safeguards are in this bill to address those concerns?
So those MPs and those campaigners who have fought for a change of the law say that these safeguards will be the best in the world. So the bill in the UK is modelled after the state of Oregon. The safeguards are a lot. There's 2 independent doctors who have to say that this have to really check that the person wants to die of their free will. It's only possible for somebody who is anyway terminally ill and has a life expectancy of 6 months or less. But there will also be a High Court judge who will then check whether everything is done legally and that the process was right. However, disability rights campaigners are still worried. They are worried that the coercion is maybe more subtle, that it's not about somebody forcing you to die against your wish, but maybe people feel that they don't want to be a burden to their loved ones at the end of their lives, and that they will, in a more subtle way, be they don't want to be a burden financially, also emotionally. They don't want to see the loved ones, they don't want to see them suffer, so that they are drawn into making a decision that they would otherwise maybe not would have made.
Birgit, thank you very much. That was our correspondent, Birgit Maas, in London.
Okay, so obviously, guys, in the UK, the assisted dying bill passed its second reading. So I was just wondering, what do you guys think about what was said in the video? Do you guys agree with it? Do you guys think assisted dying is a bit of a concern?
I think it's a very interesting debate, like both sides, neither side is right nor wrong, and I think it's such a sensitive issue that it's not surprising that it's caused a lot of separation and it's taking a while to be passed. Personally, I think I'm in support of the bill as long as there's like restrictions on it. I think there's certain, they were talking about the safeguards, like the 6-month rule, terminally ill. And I think so long as there's those details in place, it's okay. But then there's also the issue of but how do you know if someone's being coerced? That's a very real concern. And I think it would be interesting to see from a psychologist's perspective on they can weigh in on this debate and say, well, look for the sign, maybe train doctors, or even be involved in the process of if someone is wanting to go through that process.
I mean, personally, the way I think about it is, right, it's if you have a right to free speech or something, you also have a right to silence. No one can force you to speak freely, can they? So it's if you have a right to die, a right to live, you should have a right to die, in my opinion. I don't know. I just think someone should have the option to choose to die in an honorable way without having to force them to go through unimaginable pain. I don't know if you guys agree or if you guys disagree with that at all.
I do agree with what you're saying as well. I think I wouldn't know how what it's like to go through being terminally ill, because I'm not terminally ill. So, but I think it's important to try and relate to the fact that it's probably absolutely awful. So people try and take their own lives in
a less humane, I don't want to say humane because it's not humane, but in like quite a traumatic way. So I think if assisted dying is sort of past, then they can go peacefully at home where they probably want to pass away rather than something traumatic. And also I think a lot of people don't want to go into care homes because they feel like they've like lost their quality of life. So I think then I also see the supporting of that. But again, like Abby said, with the sort of 6 months thing and the safeguardings, I think that has to definitely be in place because not just anyone can decide that they don't want to like live anymore. So that's what I think.
I think in theory, assisted dying is a really good idea, but in practice, it's about whether it will actually work because there's so much potential for it to cause harm and for it to go wrong. I think especially at the moment, there are a lot of safeguards in place, but as you know, when you pass one law, it kind of opens a gateway for more. So I think the question should be, you know, what comes next? Because if you expand it, then it's questions of, for example, for dementia patients, do they have the capacity to choose? Do they not? And in that kind of instance, how do you make that choice? So I think in its current form, it's good to have all these measures in place, but there is still a lot of harm that could be done bypassing this. And, you know, what happens next? It's such a sensitive topic. You have to be so careful with how you handle it. And so I think people do need to like pay close attention to what lawmakers decide to do with it next, because yeah, a lot of potential to do harm, I think.
I feel like I agree with Emily. Like in theory, it is like a good idea, but I think it does have the potential to do a lot more harm than it will do good. And like there's, even with the safeguards that they're gonna put in place, like there's no way of making sure that no one was coerced into doing it, or that there was no like outside party like putting the idea into their head. And I think that there's so many different circumstances in which someone could be like terminally ill, or like what illness they have also makes their circumstance so different. So you can't really have one bill that applies to like everyone who has only 6 months left. Like there's such like a spectrum of ways someone can be like ill that I think it would be hard to put into practice and like to actually make sure like no one's being forced into doing it.
So I remember talking to some people who disagreed with the bill as well, and some things they said were the bill doesn't actually mention pain. So our assumption is like, oh, they're suffering like chronic pain and like unimaginable pain, but in fact, technically, the bill in its current form just says you're expected to die within 6 months, and you're terminally ill, sort of thing. So in theory, pain is not even a factor here. Like, so that's controversial. You just have someone who is okay, maybe, but at the moment, but will die. And if they're not suffering pain, is it unethical? Is it just like, you know, I don't know. That's one problem. And also another thing I heard was, and I think Emily touched upon this a bit, it's the law never stays the same, you know, like in Canada and Belgium, they passed assisted dying bills, and then they got expanded through like judges looking at the law and stuff like that. And I think there was a case in Canada where an autistic person was coerced into ending their own life. So I think there's definitely concerns. I don't know. So the question I ask you guys is, do you think it's a problem that pain is not mentioned in the bill? And, you know, how do you feel about cases like Canada and stuff like that?
I didn't realise that pain wasn't mentioned in the bill, and because I read the bill and it didn't cross my mind because I assumed that it would be there. I think when you think of quality of life, you assume that if it's bad, there's a reason, which is pain. Like, it's just the association that you make, because although someone may only have a few months left to live, that doesn't necessarily mean that they should end their life prematurely, because their quality of life could still be good enough for them to enjoy it. And so, yeah, I think pain should definitely be in that bill, 100%.
I don't think it's inherently controversial that pain isn't mentioned. I think quality of life encompasses a lot of things, and pain is one of them, but it's not the only reason that someone might have a poor quality of life. You know, some people, they might not be in pain, but they might be trapped in their own body or something. You know, it doesn't necessarily... I understand why people think it's controversial, and I think it should be mentioned in the bill, but I don't think... I think people should consider that maybe the reason they didn't put it in is that being in pain is not the only reason that you might want to end your life. Like, there might be a multitude of reasons, or it might be something completely different. In terms of the Canada case, I think mental health concerns are such a big problem that people need to think about with this bill, because unlike having a limit on 6 months to die, mental health problems do improve, and they're so fluid. And I think in cases of mental health with depression and things, I think I would generally be against assisted dying, just because you don't know what might change in those cases. It's different when you've got a terminal illness and you've got 6 months to live, but there's so much potential for it to change if it is related to mental health.
I definitely agree with what you're saying. Like, it's still very, I think the bill's still very problematic, or like is open to a lot of problems. In an ideal world, like you guys were saying, it would be like a good thing, but with it comes so many potential problems. And like you said as well about the mental health, and the Canada case, obviously they're such vulnerable people, and it's hard to sort of prove that they haven't been coerced into making that decision. And over 6 months, a lot can change, like you said. So, and I think there's a lot of support out there for people with mental health, that their only choice isn't just to choose assisted dying. Like, it's definitely worth them seeking other support than just that. So I think, yeah, it's definitely open for problems.
So some people say that the bill is only passing its second reading, and it's still yet to go through the committee stage and like actually become a law. So my question to you guys is what changes would you make to the bill? And do you think there are any changes that could change your mind and support the bill?
I was thinking that, like, discussing all these like small factors, not small as in big factors, but like small details in this bill, I think looking at case by case basis would probably be like something that should be mentioned. Like, it could be that it has to have been discussed for a long time or dependent on individual cases. But then I think the reality of that is the resources that we have, like with the NHS, with the government, with everything, finances. It's not realistic to assume that it's possible for that to happen. So I think in theory, I would like to see like more sort of guidance on what like happens for one person is not necessarily the same. It doesn't necessarily transfer to another, because different factors may be involved that influence the decision, but then obviously reality is it's not necessarily possible.
I think my main issue with the bill is that it's such a topical issue. So even if the law does pass, it's not going to go away. People are still going to be demanding more, and for more changes and for it to expand. And I think that's my main issue with it. And I don't think there's really a way you can guarantee that that's not going to happen. Like, it probably will. People aren't going to just forget about it once this bill has passed. So I think if there was a way to guarantee that, you know, they keep these harsh measures in place, I would support it more. But because it is such a controversial issue, I just don't really see that happening.
I kind of agree. I don't really think there's a way to like add to the bill and make sure that it isn't like used in the wrong way, or like that it doesn't affect someone in like a coercive way. So I think like as a whole, there's no way of really ensuring that like these safeguards put in place are actually working. And I think that there's just so many like extra factors that could like influence the person in a negative way. And like I think maybe putting in place like the thing we talked about with like pain in the bill kind of makes more sense, but like the way it is at the moment, I just don't see like it being a good thing.
So what about the argument that is, let's have some sort of functioning assisted dying in England, because if not, people are going to go abroad to places like Switzerland anyway. They're going to spend a lot of money, and perhaps, like the video said, they would die prematurely, and they would get to spend more times with their family rather than going to Switzerland in condition, you know, which is like better to go abroad and have this treatment. So what would you say a practical argument of, let's have something in England, even if it's not perfect, because these people are just going to do it anyway, right?
I would argue that not having it in place in England still means that less people are going to do it. So overall, I think it does more good, because I think the number of people realistically going abroad to do this is quite small. Whereas I think if you had it in England, there would still be more people doing this. And so I think that argument is valid, but I think by not, it's a similar argument that people have when you argue to like legalize drugs or something. Sure, if you decriminalize them, there's positives, but overall less people are going to do drugs if they're illegal. It's a similar thing. So I think still it does more good by having it illegal here, because less people are going to be put at risk and less chance of them being coerced, because there aren't going to be many people going abroad to have the procedure.
I think I'd agree, saying I wouldn't say if it's not perfect, we'll do it anyway. I think that's not dangerous, but it's a risky mentality to have when talking about laws. I think if we're going to do it, we've got to do it properly, otherwise not at all. And I think it's such a tricky topic that it will take a long time for an agreement to be reached on it if it gets done at all. I think I agree, like if it was an option here in the UK, then people would potentially have longer with their families, and you know, they wouldn't be going to a different country so soon after their diagnosis or to end their life. But I think it definitely needs to be considered as a standalone, this is what this country is doing, not necessarily in relation to, well, everyone else is doing it, so let's just jump on the bandwagon. It needs to be carefully thought out and considered.
Just one last question. How would you think like the patient and doctor relationships would be affected by this law?
I know in a lot of countries it's difficult for a lot of doctors. I think obviously doctors should have a choice. They don't have to administer the care if they don't want to, if it conflicts with their kind of own ideologies. But yeah, I can imagine it would be very difficult for a lot of doctors to choose to administer that kind of care. Like it can't be a decision that they take lightly, because ending someone's life should not be an easy decision for someone to make.
Yeah, I agree. I think it should definitely be choice of the doctor whether they want to be involved in that treatment. And I also think that definitely in the UK, the relationship between doctors and patients is not strong enough at the moment that it would warrant that kind of decision. I think, like I said earlier, I think it would have to be something that was talked about for a long time. A lot of factors were considered. It wouldn't be a, I want to do this, and the doctor says okay. It would be a long process of checking that this is what the patient actually wants, but whether that's realistic or not, I don't know. And I think that a lot of doctors would struggle with the burden of trying to come to a conclusion with their patient, and I don't necessarily think that's something that should be enforced on either party.
Yeah, I would just say that my mum is a nurse, and I asked her Oh, by the way, Mum, would you would you do this if someone asked you to end a life? And she said no, and like I think we can all respect that because I feel like at the end of the day, nurses and doctors are still like human beings, and you know they still hold beliefs, and they're not robots. You can't force them to do something against their morals. So I would definitely agree with that. And I'm not sure. The one final comment I would say is I'm quite. Um, I would value freedom, and maybe you guys would disagree with that. But I think if in the majority of cases, people should have the right to end their lives, and they do, I think the majority of the time, I think that would outweigh maybe one person that chose to, but it was the wrong decision. And I feel like many of you guys would disagree, but I think that's my internal feeling with this bill. I feel like people should have the freedom to make the right choice, sort of thing. I don't know how you guys feel about that.
Yeah, I think I agree. I think the argument of freedom to live also means freedom to die is a valid argument. I think although the law is always in protection of life, we have to acknowledge that people have free will. We have to acknowledge that what people may want may not necessarily align with the law as it stands at the moment. Like in the case that was on the video, she said that her mum tried to attempt her own life because there was no bill here, and that's a much more traumatic thing to go through. So yeah, I definitely think freedom is a factor to be considered.
I think freedom's important, but sometimes freedom does undermine other rights, and that you have to think about at what point we have the governments limit our freedoms in lots of ways every day. And it's important, but you know, like the guy in the video talking about disability rights, if you pass this, are you limiting their freedoms? Are you making their sanctity of life less than other people? Freedom is important, but there do need to be limits on our freedom. If we were all just allowed to do whatever we want all the time, the place would be carnage. Do you know what I mean? I don't think freedom is important, but you can't kind of place it above other important things.
Any final comments? Anyone?
I have a question. So this is for all of you. If someone you knew suffering like a serious illness, how would you feel about seeking or supporting assisted suicide? And do you think your cultural, religious, or personal views have shaped this? What do you think, based on those, has shaped that type of view?
I feel like for me personally, like even about the whole freedom thing, I don't think anyone should be able to decide like whether they live or die. And I feel like maybe I'm religious, so I feel like it probably stems from that. But I think whether we live or die like isn't up to us. It's kind of nature, and like when you die, like it'll happen when it happens. So I think like it shouldn't be up to the person. And if I had someone I knew and they were thinking about doing this, I don't think I'd like support it in any way, shape, or form, because I just don't think it's like morally right.
I actually kind of have experience. My grandma has dementia, and we all know she doesn't want to live. And it's really a difficult thing, because I think even before she had dementia, she probably would have said the same thing. But now that she has it, it is that question of does she have the capacity to decide that for herself? So I think it is a case-by-case basis. I think maybe if it was before she got dementia, I would have been okay with it. But now I don't think I can feel confident that she does have the capacity to make that decision for herself. And I think it should be the person's decision. So I don't think I would support it anymore. So I think it really just depends on your own circumstances.
Yeah, I think it would really depend on the situation, especially if it was someone I knew. I think I would acknowledge that it's probably not my place to necessarily say. And I think if it was someone I know, although I wouldn't want them to die, I if that's what they wanted. You can't stop someone. You can try, you can offer advice and talk about it, but at the end of the day, if someone wants to do it, they will. And I think it does just depend on the situation.
Yeah, I think it depends on the situation, because if it's someone that's very close to you, you obviously don't want to see them in pain or going through what they're going through. But I also don't believe it's sort of your place to decide that for them. But then you have got the issue of, say if they do have dementia, like you said, whether they have the capacity to make that decision for yourself, and then you don't exactly want to make that decision for them either. So I think it's really hard when it's your situation and it's someone that you love. So I don't know, I don't really know how I feel. It's very like 50-50.
Yeah, so I'm a bit confused as well. So I would say that I am religious, I'm Christian, and there's a lot of different opinions within like Christianity. So for example, some people when arguing about abortion would say that abortion is okay because it's like the most compassionate thing to do. Others would say like the sanctity of life, you should never do it. And with here, I would just think about like acting compassionately. I think that like whatever will happen, will happen, sort of thing. Like I kind of believe in predestination a bit, but just like the way that you kind of alter your destiny by having medicine that would have prolonged your life, I feel like if God put you in the condition where it would have been more compassionate and you have the choice to like end your life, I feel like it's a bit confusing. I need to think about it a bit more, but I would say definitely I would want the option, and I feel like I would want that for myself, you know, to choose to be able to when to die and have a good final goodbye with my family in a painless manner. So yeah, a lot to think about, but I would say yeah, I would probably support it. Any other comments? No? Thank you guys for watching. This was a really deep debate. It was like a really intelligent debate as well, so I enjoyed it. So thank you guys for watching. Thank you everyone. And
Thank you.
bye.
You can press record and then just clap for me. Someone at the table, anyone, just clap. Lovely.
Hello everyone, it's FYA here. So we're the placement students and we're going to... Okay, can I start?